In this activity, we're going to learn some more about adding style. So you want to start with the HTML file, CSS file, and images that you had left over from the last activity. So the way they were when they were done. So the way mine looks when it was done is like this. I've got some changes to the A tags, the heading centered, and I've got two paragraphs that I've set style on: border, margin, padding, and text align on. So you want to start at this point for this activity, and we're going to learn some more. Now remember how we did the selector for the A tag when it was visited? Well, there's other kinds of action selectors that you can add. So what I want to do is show you the hover one. And you can add this to an A tag or to any other element. I want to add it to my paragraph that has the special style. So the selector is going to be p.special and then :hover. All right, so this allows me then to add a particular style when that paragraph is being hovered over. And that means when you move the mouse over it, right? So now when I hover over it, nothing happens. It all stays exactly the same style. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to say, well, when you hover over it, I want you to change that background color to another color. So I'm just going to make it just a little bit lighter. And this will be, you can use something really subtle or something really bold. So let me try that. And now if I refresh here, now when I hover over there, notice that that background changes and it gets just that little bit lighter, but you see that movement happening. And you can make this more stark by choosing a different color, right? You can go something much darker and say make it this one. Okay, so you go ahead and add a hover property on your paragraph, something that you would like a change made on hover. So, and you can do that to the A tags too, so they change style somehow when you hover over, and that's a really common thing to do with hyperlinks. All right, let's go play with this table for a while. There's a few things that we can do this table. Number one, it's really common to on a table to be able to want borders, right? We just kind of expect them. We're kind of surprised we didn't have them. So let's go ahead and add a border to our table. So if I select the table, you have to spell it right, then I can add border. Remember that we did this combination border one, and we can set the style. So I'm going to make this solid, and I'm going to make it 4 pixels big. And the color, what color do I want it to be? I could do, let me do that really dark blue. See what color that is. I haven't used that yet. You can pick whatever color you want. So pick it out of that group so that it goes together. So you keep those colors out of the group. And there I got a border around the table. Now it's not quite what I was expecting. I kind of want to get borders around each little individual piece. So instead of choosing table, do you remember what those elements are? So if I go inside the table, I have rows with TRs, I have THs with table headers, and I have TDs. So let's try a few of these and see how that happens. So let's try T row and just see if we can get it around the row. So we know we can get it around the whole table. And rows, it doesn't work. So it won't put a border around rows. So that doesn't do us any good. Let's try TD, the table data. So if I do that, then I get borders around table data, and here the table header. I can leave those unbordered, or I can make those bordered as well by putting a comma T header. Remember that if you want to do more than one, you separate them with commas. And now I have it around the table data and the table headers. Okay, this isn't exactly what I expected. I really did get a border around each one, but notice how there's a gap between the borders. And in fact, that's a value you can play with, how big you want that gap to be. That's another property. But what about if you want to get rid of them altogether? And you can do that by collapsing them. Now, this property only works on tables. So I want to do this on the table. I'm not going to put my border around the table, but I'm going to set the border collapse property on the table. And I want to set it to collapse. Right? The keyword collapse. And I say save it and refresh. And there, now I get those borders that I expect. They collapse those borders so that there's a border between them, an individual border between them rather than two instead of borders around. All right, so there's borders around the table. Now, what are some things we want to do to this? Well, it'd be nice to move it away from, to move that table away from that image, right? And so remember in the border box that that's outside the border between the next element. So let's go ahead and put around that border, let's put some margin. That was the margin part. And I could do margin bottom, or I could do the one that separates all of them. So I want now before, remember how we did, so let's say that I want the top, it always starts at the top, right? So let's say that I want some serious space, a little bit of space here. So I'm going to put 32 pixels on the top, and then I'm going to put 24 on the right, and 32 on the bottom, and 24 on the left. So let's go ahead and save that and refresh. And there I was able to move some space, right? And so I've got that space from the left and the right. Let's go back, and the left and the right are 24 pixels, and the top and the bottom are 32. Well, remember that when we use 4 numbers, we get top, right, bottom, left, right? Start at the top and go clockwise. Another way you can do this is with 2 numbers. And if you do 2 numbers, then the first one is the top and bottom, and the next one is the left and right. And that's what I want. So I can just use this with actually 2 values here. And it's exactly the same because I get that 24, I get the, which was which? I get the 32 top and bottom. So 32 pixels top and bottom, and then 24 pixels left and right for my margin. Okay, now notice another thing here that's bothering me is how tight those numbers are against the borders. And what that means is there is no padding here. Now the padding is the space between the content and the border, and I want to add padding between all these borders. So I want this on the TDs and the TH. So I'm going to put a padding here in the TD/TH. Okay, you add some padding too. You can pick your value, but add how much you want. I'm going to go ahead and put 12 pixels of padding and see what that comes up with. All right, okay, so there you go. Fix this up with your table. Collapse the borders, pick border color, style, and width. Add padding and margin to get that table set out of sight. Okay, the next thing we're going to work with is background image. So we have already put a background color on the body. There's another property that we can do a background and a background image. Okay, now the way you do this is with a URL. And inside here, we're going to put the name of the file we want. And we do this with the same way that we do our other relative ones. This is from where you are, find this image. So we know we have to go inside the folder named images. And we're going to use this one that's a little bit opaque, Wise Image 8. So let's go ahead and images. Notice no quotes or anything. wiseimage8.jpg. And I save that, and I refresh, and there, notice there's that image. Wow, and notice what it does. It repeats over and over and over again. Okay, so it has that repeat over and over again. Also notice that it overrides the color, because we already set the color, and the image wins when we do that. Well, the fact that backgrounds tile is something that you can control with CSS. The default is that they're repeating, but you can actually change the background repeat. So background repeat, and you can set it, by default it's repeat. I can say no repeat is another value that it can be. So when I do that, I just get one. So there's the background. It just doesn't repeat. It just shows it in one place. Now, once I'm not repeating, or even if I am repeating, I can choose where the position of that image is. So, I can do background position. And background position, you have two values, and it's left, center, right for your vertical positioning. So I want to put this in the center. And then you have the that's the horizontal. Left, center, right is the horizontal positioning. And then you have vertical, right? And your vertical can be top, center, or bottom. So I want this to be at the top. So I say that. And by the way, you can leave either of these out. If you leave them out, then the other one is center. So there I said at the top center is where I want that. Repeat. All right. Now that's the position. Now I can change the other values for repeat. There's repeat and no repeat. And I'll show you repeat again. That's the default. And that's where it repeats all over. But now you'll notice a difference. Now it's repeating from the center. Remember that it was repeating before from the top left, which is the default position of where it starts. And now it's starting at the center top. And so we were able to change that with CSS. We can also do repeat X, which is, it only repeats across horizontally. Or we can do repeat Y, and it only repeats vertically. So you have lots of options with the repeat control, what you want to do. One more thing I want to show you before we leave the background is that there is a combination shorthand property that is just background. Oops, you have to spell it right. Background. And you can do all of these. Again, let me do the same thing where I just simply comment it out so none of them are applying. Oops. And then save it. Okay, and we don't have anything in the background, right? I just commented it all out, so we have nothing. But now I can put it all here together. I can put the color, and then just a space, and the URL, and a space, and the repeat value. And it doesn't matter what order you do these in. The browsers can tell them all the values apart, so you can put it in whatever order you want. So now I can put all those properties in that single shorthand property background and get it all back again. Okay, and there's my hover still working. All right, so there's background image and background image, background repeat, and background position. Lots of things we can do there. Okay, now the next property we're going to learn is the float property. By the way, go ahead on yours and add all the background properties and make use of all of those. And you don't have to do them exactly like mine, but make sure that you've used all 4 of those properties. Okay, here's the background float. So one of the things we can do is to float something out of the normal flow. So notice how things are flowing. It's just one after another. If we look at our code, it just goes down. It does the heading. Well, we go to the very top, right? It starts with a heading, then the list, then a heading, then a paragraph, and it goes down this list table, then this image, then this heading, the browser. It's just one after another, very linearly. Well, we have the option to float something. So I'm going to go ahead, and what I want to float is this image. So I want you to look at this image. It has a table above it and some a couple headings and paragraphs below it. So I'm going to, this turns out to be my only image, so I don't have to give it a class value. If I had more than one, then I could give it a class value. So my image, I want it to float, and now I can do right or left. And I want it to float left, actually. So I save that. Okay, you follow along and float your image and see what happens. So what happened? Remember before that all these things were below it? Well, what happens is when you float it, it moves that element out of the normal flow and it lets everything flow up in place. Now, it pushes aside the text, right? So the text doesn't go behind, but notice how this whole paragraph really flows up behind it. And so the whole border and background color all flows up behind it, but the text is pushed over to the side. So when you float something, whatever is below it floats up behind that element. And the text is pushed off to the side. So there we can push that off that way. Now, I really just want this browser style sheets and that paragraph to be off to the side of it. And I don't want this navigation list. It's like, oh no, I want this to go below. That looks really bad to have that paragraph going up under there. So I can control that as well. So what I want to do is, these are okay floating, is I want to stop the flow right here on that heading navigation list. So I have more, that's this heading right here, and I have multiple heading 2s. So I'm going to set a style just on this one. So I'm going to add class again. Let me do this. Let me add ID, which is another way to name an element. So let me use ID. The difference between class and ID. Class names an element, and you can have multiple elements with exactly the same class value. IDs uniquely identify an element. So you would never use the same ID more than once. It would be very unique. So I'm going to call this my nav. No, what should I call this? It's my nav list paragraph, or heading 2. So I'm going to save that. Now the way I select an ID is with a pound sign. So this is a heading 2. I can do it a couple ways. I can do heading 2 pound, or I can just do an element with ID set to nav list. Okay? So instead of a dot, when you're using ID, you use a pound. And what I want to do here is I want to clear it. And what clear does is it clears it from any floating elements. And so I want to clear it on the left. So that won't allow anything to float left to it. And I can use right or both. So here, watch what happens. So there it clears, and it won't allow anything on the to float on the left of it. And that pushes it down below. All right, go ahead and clear that on yours. Now notice the next thing that really is bothering me here is how tight these things are up against that image. So I'm going to add a margin, and I'm going to add it right to the image because that'll make it have that margin all the way around it. So on my image, add a margin, and you add a margin on yours, and this doesn't have to be too big. And refresh. And there we've made some gaps so things aren't right up against it. Added that. Added some margin there. So there's float and clear. Let's see, what else can we try here? So we have already done centering, like we can center text by using text align, and that's great. When that works and that's how you want to make sure you maintain that. But let me show you a couple of different things that there are sometimes when we want to center an entire element and text align won't work all the way for us. So I'm going to, let's say that we want to center this paragraph, right? So if I go into that paragraph and I use text align center, so I go up here and I make this center, it will actually center the text within the paragraph, but the paragraph itself is not centered. All right, so sometimes text align won't do everything we want it to do. So let's go ahead and how do we do that? There are 3 things you have to do when you want to center an element. And I'm going to just write these down here so you can see them. The 3 things are, it has to be a block element, it has to have an explicit width. not an inherited width, not a default. It has to have an explicit width, and it has to have the left and right margins are equal. All right, so that is how you center an element. Okay, that's centering an entire element rather than the content within an element. So this is to center an entire element. And really, that's how you do that. And the other one is just to center the content within an element. This is easy, right? Because this is text align center. So when you want to do that, that's good. But when you want to center an entire element, you have to make sure of these three things. Now, a paragraph is already a block element. So we're good. We're golden. We don't have to make a change on the display for that. The property for that is display. By the way, you can change that from being a block element. But it's already a block element, so we don't have to set that. It needs to have an explicit width. And by default, it's 100%. But we have actually changed the width on this paragraph. So if we go look, there we have identified the width as 4 inches. Check. So now we have width. So the last thing that we need to do is make sure the left and right margins are equal. So left and right margins are equal. So that's the one thing I have left to do. Well, notice that the left and right margins vary. I mean, I could set it and it would center it in a certain place, but notice how it's really hard to guess what those widths are because it varies. So the easiest way, a really simple way to do this is to set left and right to auto. So I can go up here and I can do, right now I have margin, remember top, and so this is right, and this is left. So I'm just going to set those to auto, which is a value that is allowed for margins. And now I have just centered that paragraph. And notice how it stays centered as the page grows and shrinks. So that's pretty cool. Notice what's happening down here as I grow and shrink that page. So I can, all of a sudden my float no longer works when it gets small. My table is continually shrinking, right? So things are happening here as you grow and shrink those. You do have some options here. So one of the things that we can do is put a specific width on the body, and that won't allow this kind of movement with these elements. So if I go up to the body and I say width, and I can set, I don't know, 1024 pixels, so that's pretty big. What that will do is that will define how big that is. Okay, so now watch. So it says, okay, now this is 100,024 pixels wide. Now notice that it stays that wide even as it gets smaller and smaller. So no longer, this doesn't drop down. What happens is I get a scroll bar here at the bottom. I'm not seeing all of it, and I have to use the scroll to see all of it. Now, notice that when I make this bigger, I might be able to see this better if I make this smaller. So let me make this 720. Not 1720, 720. And I refresh that. Okay, now it's smaller. Now you can see it stays without movement. I have more control over what size it is. Okay, because things just kind of stay in place a little bit better. But also notice that it's on the left. Okay, so the width is all on the left. Well, you can center the whole body just the way that we did that paragraph. And remember what things we had to have. It had to be a block element. Body is already a block element. It has to have an explicit width. We just added that. right? On the body, we just added explicit width. So the only thing we have left is to make the left and right margins the same. So I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to do this really easy here. I'm just going to set not margin bottom. That's not what I wanted. Just margin to auto. And that makes top, right, bottom, left, all auto, but that makes the left and right auto. And now I can center that, and then now it keeps everything in the center. So now it still won't allow it to get any smaller than that, right? You're going to get that scroll bar when it gets less than 720. But now when it's bigger, then it keeps the body centered. So lots of different things that you can do with that. All right, the last thing we're going to do is play a little bit with lists. So you have some options to make changes to lists. And if we go up here and we say, okay, well, let's look at our CSS reference, and we can choose lists. Right there, lists and counters. The one that I'm going to change is the list style type. Notice there's other ones that you can set, and that's cool. You can add an image for the list bullet, right? You can identify the position and the type, and then list style is just that combination. But the one I want you to play with is list style type. So what's fun here is it shows you what all of these different options are. They're all keywords of what you want your list style type to be. And if you run this try it yourself down here, it shows you every one of them. So it shows you the circle, the disc, the square, and then the rest of these are different forms of numbering, right? And so there's your decimal, there's decimal with a 0 in front of it. There's letters, lower alpha, lower Latin, upper alpha, lots of options here. So I'm going to leave this one to you. The property is list style type. Oh, and by the way, see how you can put it on the UL or OL, right? And so the numbered ones are normally on the OL, and the unnumbered ones are on the bullets are on the UL, but you can even mix that up. But go ahead and change your list so that it has a different list style type than the default. So I'll leave that for you as the last change you need to make before you finish up this activity and submit it.